What's up, everybody? Marvel Cross 316 back with another comic book flashback. Today we are looking at the Amazing Spider-Man issue number 93. This issue came out in February of 1971, and today we are seeing the return of the Prowler. That's right, the Prowler returns in this issue. It just seems like Spider-Man's life continues to get more complicated as the issues just unravel here. First it was Iceman, now we got the Prowler. And how is the Prowler going to fall into all this? We're going to be looking into all this as we continue this story. I love this cover, by the way. This is just an awesome cover drawn by John Romita Sr. here. Love the greens and the yellows. Good contrast here. So I have to say, awesome cover. Today's title is The Lady and the Prowler. And we got to give credit where credit is due. As always, this issue is brought to you by Stan Lee, who wrote this issue, and we have John Romita on the artwork, Artie Simek on the lettering page. And so, if you don't remember what's going on, basically Captain George Stacy died in issue number 90, and Spider-Man is now being charged for the death of George Stacy. So the cops are after him. And we just are now trying to figure out how is this going to impact the relationship between Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker, because Gwen doesn't know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And we see here that Gwen is wondering, why hasn't Peter come to me? Why is he ignoring me? All these emotions are going through her head, and she's just dying to get a phone call from Peter Parker. But when she hears the phone ring, she thinks it's Peter, but actually it is her uncle Arthur from London, and he's offering her to come to London to live with basically him and her aunt here back in London, because pretty much Gwen has no family now. She has nowhere to go, and nothing's really holding her back except for Peter Parker. And so we see here that she really doesn't want to go, but she says she has to think about it. And so they say on the phone, of course, child, call when you can. So after she gets off the phone, she finally gets a buzz from the door, and it just so happens to be Peter here. And he basically says, I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner. And then she's like, is anything wrong? And here that he's basically just wanting to say, I'm sorry for this. I want to tie up some loose ends. And then this is when Gwen breaks the news to Peter, basically saying that she's gotten a call from her aunt and uncle in London, and they want her to move to London. And Peter Parker's like shocked here, as anybody would be, and he's like, please don't go, please. And he kisses her here, as we see, and he tells her that he loves her, but then he says, basically, he starts to think about how he forgotten that, oh yeah, I am Spider-Man, and when am I going to relay this information to Gwen here? And so he basically says, I can't tell you to stay. And then she says, but you won't. And then she goes to her room. She says, Peter, you need to leave. And it's just not looking good for Peter here. It's just Peter and Gwen's relationship is really bad here. And in this issue, it's just not looking good. If only Peter Parker would get enough guts to tell Gwen that he is Spider-Man here. And so we see that a very defeated Peter Parker leaves Gwen's little house here, and he just starts to blame Spider-Man for everything. If only I didn't have this double life, if only I didn't have the threat of Spider-Man over my head, life would be normal. But then, oh, who am I kidding? I need the danger. I need the action. And so what he does is he forms a little web net here to put all his clothes in, and he suits up as Spider-Man, and he's going to go swinging throughout the night here, as only Spider-Man can do. And he's looking down below, and people are pointing at him, and he's like, they don't know. I'd trade places with any of them, because none of them could have the troubles and the hang-ups that I do. And so we're going to then cut to a new scene here, and this is where we're going to see how Hobby Brown, the Prowler, gets involved in this issue. We see that he got back with Mindy, his girlfriend, and we see that while Mindy and him are looking for houses to move into so that they can get married soon, he's not hearing a word from Mindy here. What's on his mind is something else, and he says, I'll have to go somewhere. I have to tie up some loose ends, but I'll be back. Don't worry. He said, see you later, beautiful. And so what's on the Prowler's mind, what's on Hobie Brown's mind, is the fact that back in issue 87, he paid a debt to Spider-Man here by basically impersonating Spider-Man in issue 87, and he used his claws, his Prowler glove claws here, to basically mimic Spider-Man's wall crawling. And he remembers how he went into the Stacy home. That's when everybody was there, a bunch of people, and he basically did what Spider-Man wanted him to do. But now, when he reads the newspaper, he sees that Spider-Man was caught in the death of Captain George Stacy, and he's wondering, is he an accomplice? Is Spider-Man really guilty for killing Captain George Stacy? So we see here that the Prowler is now going to come back on the scene as Hobie Brown feels the need to go after Spider-Man and bring Spider-Man to justice here. And so that's exactly what we're going to see. That's the main mission of the Prowler, as he's now going to, as we said, I've got to bring Spider-Man to justice. So that's what we're going to see the Prowler do. And he tests out his weaponry. Everything seems to be in check here, and now he's going to be on the prowl, no pun intended, looking for Spider-Man. So Spider-Man gets the idea. He says, you know what? Enough is enough. I need to just confront Gwen right now as Spider-Man and just reveal my secret identity to her. If I love her this much, then I need to just tell her. I need to just get the guts and do it. And so that's what he's going to do. He's going to swing on by to Gwen Stacy's house. Upon swinging by, we see that the police notice Spider-Man swinging in the air. They need to follow him. And so while Spider-Man is peeping through the window, he notices Gwen is crying. I mean, she's still coming up with this decision whether she needs to leave Peter and go to London or not. And so he's like, man, this is just not good. Do I need to leave or what? And he said, no, I don't need to weaken. I need to just, but all of a sudden we see Spider-Man's spider sense starts to tingle, and this is when we're going to see the Prowler confront Spider-Man, as the Prowler thinks that he's now going after helpless Gwen Stacy here. So it's just not looking good. Now Gwen is starting to get panicky, and she notices Spider-Man's outside her window. So now she thinks Spider-Man is an even bigger threat here. And so now we're going to see the Prowler fighting Spider-Man once again. And man, just could things get any worse here for Spider-Man? And he's like, no, Hobie, you don't understand. I wasn't responsible for the death of George Stacy. But we see here that the Prowler thinks that Spider-Man is guilty. So Spider-Man's trying to swing away, trying to figure out something, whatever he can do to get the Prowler off his back. We see that the police are down below. They're going to be throwing a cordon around the building. So we got Spider-Man and Prowler fighting up on top of this building. All out action once again, drawn by John Romita. An awesome story told by none other than the great Stan Lee. They soon dive through this skylight window here, and this is where they're going to basically be free falling through this building, and this is not going to be looking good for the Prowler as he loses his grip upon kicking Spider-Man in the chin here. So the Prowler is fallen to his death, but we see that Spider-Man tells and guides the Prowler on what to do. He injures himself, and we see that Spider-Man then is going to crawl back up past the skylight, and he takes off the costume of the Prowler. The costume of the Prowler is definitely destroyed at this point, and we see that Spider-Man is going to rush Hobie Brown to the hospital, and we see that Hobie Brown is then going to be taken care of at this hospital. We see that Mindy arrives minutes later upon finding out that her boyfriend got injured here, and we see that Spider-Man is going to leave the area here knowing that Mindy is with her boyfriend, and he's like, man, I wish I had that. And he's like, oh yeah, I do have that with Gwen, and I can't lose her. I need to go and check this out. So he goes back to her apartment, and he notices that someone is unpacking their luggage. It looks like Gwen has moved out, and he asks the person, the new roommate here, where is she? And he finds out that she's at the airport. So now Spider-Man's starting to panic. He needs to get to the airport so he doesn't lose Gwen Stacy here. So he swings on by the airport as fast as he can. He knows that she's going to London. He gets hurriedly as Peter Parker changes back to Peter Parker here. He tells the person at the front desk, has the London flight departed yet? And she says yes. And we see a very distraught Peter Parker once again, his heart broken this time, knowing that he has lost Gwen for good this time. Gwen is now going to be moving to another country, moving across the pond to live in London. And so what's going to happen next time as we look at issue number 94, as we look at the wings of the wicked. So what could that be all about? We'll find out next time as we look at issue number 94. Hope to see you there. And until next time, keep reading comics.